Not on purpose.
Right. Hello, guys. Welcome to our Through Our Eyes podcast recording. It's a podcast that aims to highlight marginalised voices and basically go more in depth into individual stories and hopefully bring some education and light to various I read arson there, and I
No, bring light to topics that need to be discussed and need a little bit more attention on them and representation. We got there. We can edit that together. Don't worry.
Yeah. Sorry, you can edit that, right?
Fine.
Edit live editing.
It's fine.
Right. This podcast is hosted by the lovely Paige and myself.
Dracthonia.
This has sparked from Paige's love child of streams highlighting marginalized topics that is every 2 months. Sorry. Look, my brain is not doing well today, so...
Jack, would you like me to take the floor for a second?
Yes, please do.
All right. This podcast came about out of an idea from the Through Our Eyes streams, which are hosted every 2 months by myself and usually a slew of co-hosts. The last one was a couple of weeks ago, which was an LGBTQIA+ special, where we raised over £1,800 for the Mermaids charity, who are a UK-based charity who seek to help and give information to gender non-conforming youth, trans youth, and their families. So that's amazing, and thank you everyone who helped us raise. It was absolutely fantastic, absolutely fantastic. We also announced our next stream, which is taking place in May, end of May, which is a BIPOC special. So Black, Indigenous, People of Colour special, which is hosted by myself and 5 different creators this time. So we have got Wreck-It Raven, we have got Shiny Pen, we've got Atypical Queer, we have got Papa Bear, and we have got Bendy Dinosaurs. They'll be coming and helping host each section as we look into BIPOC issues, how to be a better ally, how to be, you know, a better friend, how to support people, what to do to create spaces, what to do when, though there are issues, what issues look like from the perspective of a BIPOC person, and successes, challenges, all those things we cover every other time. So that's very exciting. We've started planning already, and we'll be going on through there. And that kind of leads on to what today's podcast is about.
Yes, so today we have Daydreamer Dan to talk to us about life as an Asian American and the rising prevalence of attacks against Asian people across the world. Obviously, this is a topic that has been very highlighted in the media recently, and during this stream we will be raising money for the Stop AAPI Hate charity. So if you would like to help out, the link should be posted quite often throughout the chat as we talk to Dan. So
yes.
Dan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I would love to introduce myself. So hi everyone, I'm Dan, aka Daydreamer Dan. I am a Asian American streamer who lives over on the west coast of the US currently. I was super thrilled to be invited onto the podcast. My computer, unfortunately, was not as thrilled, as you guys can tell from the lack of camera that's been happening. But I was very excited to see every single to be invited onto the show and to potentially talk to all of you guys about everything that's been happening. It is a very emotional and very to a certain extent, like very personal kind of situation and topic to talk about with me. So I'll try to be as serious as possible, but I'll try to bring some lightheartedness as well and talk about my own experiences, and then of course answer all the questions that I'm sure the community has sent along to you guys. But yeah, just to talk a little bit more about like what I do is I'm a variety streamer. I'm very community focused. I spend at least an hour every single
I think we've lost them for a moment. Dan, can you hear us?
Oh, no.
Well, then I shall introduce Dan. Dan is a fantastic content creator who spends a lot of time chilling with their community. They also do the blue screen.
Everything that I make.
We found you. Hello.
Yes, I do. Unfortunately, I can't do it live right now, but
That's right.
I would love to. You can pull.
We
up a
lost
clip
you
or
for a
something.
moment.
Oh, hello. Are we back?
Yeah, we lost you.
We lost you.
Around, you spend about an hour.
Oh, gotcha.
We want to try and fill in those blanks, but probably not the best.
It's like a Mad Lib of some sort. No, I spend an hour about an hour every stream chatting with my community and talking to them about like their days and stuff like that. But I do like to play video games as well. The biggest thing I like to do during my stream, though, is make sure that everyone feels as welcomed as possible, give them compliments as soon as they follow. And then a quarter of everything that I make on Twitch, I actually end up donating towards the Arc of King County, which is the Arc is a not nationwide, it might be nationwide, but it's at least nationwide in the US that helps those with mental and developmental disabilities have more self-advocacy and raises more resources for them as well. So, yep, and I raised that specifically Washington in the Seattle area.
Ah, fantastic. Yeah, I saw a Twitter post from you recently about that, which is fantastic. You raised a fair amount, which is really good. Really good.
Yeah. I think for the year of 2020, I think we raised over $6,000. I can't remember how much it was, but yeah,
wow.
that's just from from Twitch payouts and donations and stuff like that too. Yeah, so really awesome and really proud of everybody for giving in our community and stuff like that.
Well, that's fantastic. As you can see, there's a link to Dan's Twitch in the chat, so go give some love while we get into the nitty-gritty of this podcast. So first question, we usually like to go over the lowdown of your individual story, what challenges you face as an individual, and generally what brought you here today.
Gotcha. Yeah, I would love to. So the original Through Our Eyes event that was held by Paige, wow, that must have been a few months ago now that I think about it. It's crazy how time just freaking flies by sometimes. But yeah, the original event, when I was invited, I was very glad that I was able to potentially have a chance to talk about being an Asian American streamer, or at least an Asian American content creator on the internet. Until like recently, I would say that like there aren't that many Asian American role models, especially in kind of like the streaming community, or like even to kind of further it into like the Western like entertainment kind of industry, that it makes it really hard sometimes to hear those kind of stories without it necessarily being through a certain kind of lens that may be a bit more skewed towards potential stereotypes or something like that. So being able to be invited here and talk about my experiences as a second generation Asian American, my parents moved over to the US in their early 20s, and then so for me to grow up pretty much my entire life here, and then have one aspect of life where I get to learn see it from like an American growing up as in America, as well as seeing the immigrant perspective of like how my parents and how my grandparents deal with certain issues, and how they had to overcome certain obstacles because of everything that was happening. Yeah, I'm assuming that was a big part of why I was invited. A part of the reason why I was able to meet Paige was because a video that I posted on Twitter that went over this idea of being asked like, what kind of Asian are you? Or like, what, like, yeah, exactly. Thank you for giving the quotation marks so that I can show. But yeah, being asked what kind of Asian you are, and then a whole, like bringing up a whole bunch of other questions in a very humorous sort of way of like, that are asked often towards Asian streamers of like, oh, like what kind of Asian are you? Ooh, like they try to drop words in like what they assume is like the tongue of like whatever ethnicity you are, and then when it isn't the most appropriate time or the most bringing up topics like that. So I kind of just made a lighthearted kind of video about calling that kind of behavior out of like, it isn't really that important. Of course, like if you hang out in my community or if you chat for a little bit, you would be able to tell what kind of, like I talk about my experiences as a Korean American, but unfortunately, like sometimes people just see that as like the only white or black of like, oh, I see an Asian person on Twitch, let me ask them what kind of Asian they are. And then, of course, recently with the Stop AAPI stuff that's been happening, a lot of Asian American hate, or Asian hate, I should just say, because it's not just limited to America, has been happening, and a whole bunch of events of Asian people across the world are being attacked to a certain extent. And yeah, I remember early on in my Twitch career, which was last year, when COVID started to pick up a little bit, I do remember incidences of people coming into my chat and trying to be like, oh, like pretty much saying very, very negative and just rude comments about about COVID and asking me if I had COVID or if I was spreading COVID and stuff like that. Very, very disgusting, very, very gross. So I was very, very glad that you were able to give me that invitation to come back onto this stream, onto this podcast to talk a little bit about my experiences, and then to, you know, bring hopefully a little bit more light about these experiences as well.
Bro, and we will say quickly, just for anyone listening and for you, Dan, as well, if anything we talk about today is triggering or is concerning at all and you need to take a break, simply, if you're in the chat, feel free to just step away. Don't need to say anything. Just take time for yourself, take a breather, take a walk if you need to. And Dan, if you need to take a break at any point, that is absolutely fine as well. Because these are never fun conversations, as Drac and I always say, for things that we can talk about. You always get the gallows humor, and we always laugh because you laugh or you cry. And so we completely understand that it's going to be tough and that you may joke about it or you may need a minute, and that is absolutely cool with us as well. And same goes for chat. If you need to take time, you take time.
Also, you can type !need help in the chat for resources if you are struggling at this current time from anything that is discussed. Okay, so let's get more into what's been going on, and just initially to clarify where this is coming from, why it's being popularized in the media, and has it always been this way, or is it a case of new events suddenly making this appear out of nowhere? Which I can guess the answer to this one, but
there is an escalation or a common baseline.
Yeah, it's definitely just like what you said, an escalation. So prejudice has always existed. Prejudice has, and prejudice probably will continue to exist, even if we all continue working on it. And, you know, let's say magically if racism were to just get erased tomorrow, all of the memories and all the prejudice that we had would make that very difficult for something like that to happen. And oftentimes that's why you hear people who say, like, you shouldn't say colorblind, because if you say colorblind, that's almost like erasing the experiences and you know, hardships that people may have gone through because of the color of their skin or the way that they look. But just like you said, a lot of this hate has just been escalated and kind of elevated by certain voices, certain, you know, people with higher power talking about everything that has been happening regarding COVID. I mean, even now, I'm sure you hear a lot of people who have that kind of voice calling COVID something along the lines of, and this might be a little bit like wrong, but it's like calling it like the Asian disease or the Chinese disease or something like that. Very, very disgusting terms to use, just, and very, very generalized, and obviously it invites a lot of this violence and a lot of this animosity towards people who are Asian. I talked a little bit about those kinds of experiences when I first started on Twitch, which was like a year ago, about a year ago actually, now that I think about it, because COVID has caused what is it? Yeah, it's been almost a year exactly. When a lot of the isolation started to happen in the U.S. That's when I first started to hear a lot of those comments and a lot of those inappropriate messages about COVID specifically. But obviously before that, there's the whole idea of like the model minority of like Asian Americans or Asian immigrants being seen in a completely different way than other people of color because they work so hard and they're so smart and they listen so well and they're so good at that. Why can't other immigrants be just like the Asian immigrants and stuff like that? And then of course positive racism of like thinking that every Asian must be smart or has to act a certain way or very studious or very kind of like that kind of idea, even to a certain extent, the fetishized state. I don't know why I have a hard time saying that word, fetish. I always feel like I'm about to say fettuccine. I always feel like I'm already, but the fetishing, the fetishization. Thank you, of Asian. God, of Asian men and women, which whether it was from like early on to like even recently with like K-pop and stuff like that, of people seeing people who are Asian or Korean in my case, and then seeing them in a very fetishized way. God, that's really hard for me to say.
It's a terrible word to say.
It took me a second. It took me a second, but yeah. So that was a very long and drawn out way of saying, yes, this has been happening for a long time. Maybe outright aggression and outright violence towards Asian Americans may not have been as prevalent or as seen. This sort of prejudice has been existing since pretty much I was a child.
So in your personal experience, has it been mainly in this, like in the Twitch community, that you have experienced this sort of response, or have you experienced it outside of the Twitchverse too?
Yeah. Are we specifically talking about the COVID stuff? And
just in general, really.
Yeah.
I mean, COVID as well, obviously, because we're trying to highlight the why it's thing. But in general, what have you experienced?
Yeah, completely understand that. Yeah. So when it comes to the sort of Asian American hate, one of my earliest experiences actually comes from elementary or middle school when I was really young. At the same time, it's not explicit hate or anything like that, but it was during lunchtime and I had some Korean food that my grandparents made for me and I was eating it, and I had a little, what was it called? Like a little water bottle that my grandma filled up with some tea inside of it. And I was having my Korean food, and then these group of kids who I didn't really know that well came up and they started telling me that my food stinked. And like it didn't really smell good, and it was like, and they were like making fun of me because of how bad it was smelling. And then they saw the tea that I was drinking, and they're like, "Oh, is that pee? Are you like drinking pee with like your lunch and stuff like that?" And this is something that I talk about a lot on my stream as well. But like, this is a big reason why I absolutely despise when people make fun of other people specifically for the food, or like make fun of a food that could be a bit more cultural and stuff like that, because these kids may have just been like trying to tease me about like something, like kids being just little shitheads. Can I swear? I should have asked that beforehand.
Go for it.
Yeah, okay, gotcha. It could have just been kids. It could have just been kids trying to be little shitheads, but it went to a further extent of like them trying to make fun of like Asian food and like Asian culture to a certain extent. And growing up, that may not have been the only experience, but it was one of my first experiences of like not feeling proud of being Korean or not being proud of being Asian. And then as I kept growing up, it was to a certain extent, I felt like I wanted to not be seen as Asian. And in high school, I was complimented with quotation marks about being called the whitest Asian that someone knew. And I was like, heck yeah, that's awesome. Thanks so much. Because I did not see myself in a very, very good light when it came to my ethnicity, and being called Asian or being seen as like a stereotypical Asian or something like that was something that I avoided like the plague, because of the way that I saw that people treated Asian Americans who may have been seen a bit more stereotypical as such. So yeah, it's been something that I grew up with and I've seen a lot in real life. when a lot of these COVID stories started to happen, and then a lot of the AAPI stuff started to happen, it also helped remind me of times when my grandparents, who are now in their 80s, but this was just, I think, like 5 or 6 years ago, about 2 different stories of one where my grandma was at this stoplight, and she was going a bit slower, because she's a grandma and she's trying to take her time. And then there was a car full of these high school age kind of boys who pulled up next to her, and they all started yelling at her and like laughing at her, and then making fun of her driving skills. Obviously, they brought up Asian stereotypes during that time, and then they started to follow her back to our house as well until about like the last few turns. But like it was for several blocks that they were following her and trying to make fun of her about this, and she was frightened. She was like, she thought that she was going to be attacked. She thought that she was she was scared. She was really, really scared. And then there was another time where my grandpa was at just a store of some sort. I think it was a grocery store or something. And he was confused because it was a busy grocery store, and he tried to jump into a line and then accidentally cut this man in line, and he started like yelling at my grandpa. He was like upset, and he was like, what the hell are you doing? Like, get out of the way, like I was here first. And then my grandpa, because he doesn't really understand English super well, he saw that this man was upset, and he just tried to smile and like nod along and like just kind of like move out of the way. But the other man took that as like my grandpa laughing at him and stuff like that. And then he started to throw some slurs at him because of that, and like he was like really, really upset with my grandpa. And luckily I was able to step in and like tell them like, whoa, hold on, like my grandpa's just confused, I'm sorry, like he doesn't understand what's happening. And we moved back to the line. But like that was like an experience of mine of like just seeing how close and how frustrated people can get, and sometimes how I want to say inconsiderate, but it might be a different word that I'm looking for, but just unaware some people are of like different experiences, and how people may not necessarily understand English super well, and they're not, trying to be aggressive or rude in those states, in those situations. But yeah, those are the biggest ones that I can think of off the top of my head when it comes to outside the Twitch universe.
I'd like to just ask a bit more about, you said that you were referred to as the whitest Asian that your friends knew. Was that in like terms of skin color or attitude, and how does that make you feel now?
Yeah. So back then, that was in reference to the way that I acted, like the things I was interested in, the way that I acted. Early on, like in high school, I was like afraid of watching anime because I was afraid of being seen as too stereotypically Asian. And then I listened to a lot of music that, like things like I listened to music that was as far away as K-pop as possible and stuff like that. And the way that I acted, the way that I held myself, I tried my best to stay away from the stereotypes because I was so afraid of being seen negatively or being seen as like a very stereotypical Asian or something like that. So during that time, it was mostly the way that I held myself, the way the things that I tried to show as like my interests and stuff like that. And now I am embarrassed. I'm almost embarrassed by the way that I try to stay as far away as being Korean as possible, because it's something that I shouldn't be like embarrassed about. I shouldn't be embarrassed about like the stuff that I want to eat or watching anime just because I am Asian. Like now I realize how detrimental and how almost like self-sabotaging it was for myself to talk and to view myself in this sort of way, because I was just holding myself back from a lot of things that I probably would enjoy in life. But then B, it also was detrimental because it made me view myself in a very, very negative light, and then potentially even view others and view just being Asian as a negative aspect, which is something that I've had to grow a lot from and had to learn a lot from because it made me view myself and even other people who were Asian like in a negative light sometimes. So I'm glad that I was able to grow out of it. I'm embarrassed that it had to happen, but I'm glad that I was able to realize that I shouldn't be embarrassed by my ethnicity or anybody else like that.
Do you feel like you've been like you've kind of missed a part of like growing up with that because of that kind of distancing?
Yeah, I guess to a certain extent. To a certain extent, I think so. Because I think I grew up in a way that I thought was the most sociably acceptable, which unfortunately is also the widest way. And so because of that, there were certain times back in high school or back, not necessarily college. I feel like I kind of broke away from this kind of mindset in college, luckily, with being able to meet certain friends. And then I actually took a class that was completely about racism and like learning the nuances about racism back in college. And I feel like that's kind of where I was able to start taking those steps and breaking away from this kind of mental gymnastics of me being like, white Asians are good, and then blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I feel like I did miss out on a lot of things because I just wanted to be seen as sociably acceptable, as white as possible by a lot of my peers during that time. And you know, now I kind of regret it because like now I freaking love Korean food because I don't live at home anymore. And now whenever I do have the chance, I'm like, yes, I want to just show it and like introduce it to every single person that possibly have the chance to. And then to a certain extent of like kind of deviating from this topic as well, but like now seeing how a lot of Asian culture is being seen in like the forefront and how Asian culture is almost, like I said, seen in maybe a bit too much in the limelight sometimes of like, in the fetishization kind of way. It's interesting to me because now I'm almost like frustrated of like, well, back when I was a kid, all this stuff was smelled like it was called smelling weird and it looked like pee. And now it's like hipsters are like all enjoying this Korean food and posting it on Instagram. I'm like, cool, that's great. Thanks. I wish this happened a few years earlier if that was the case. So yeah, to a certain extent, I do feel like I missed out on a lot of experiences, but now I'm trying to embrace it and I'm trying to, you know, live my life fullest and trying to talk Korean American, and also be a little frustrated about how like it is being seen now in this very positive light when previously it had not been. And it's almost like seen as this like exotic sort of kind of, you know, this exotic sort of light, which can be frustrating.
Yeah. I don't think anyone would blame you though, I will say that, because nobody marginalized would necessarily choose to be like, and so I don't mean that people wouldn't choose to be who they are, but nobody would choose to be hated for that. The same as like gay people do not choose to be gay. Nobody would willingly be like, yes, hate me, because that's not fun. But I don't. I do understand how you feel a little bit, at least with saying, you know, you feel a little embarrassed by your prior self. But I don't think anyone could or would blame you for it at all. You do what you have to do to survive, and school is a fucking nightmare.
Yeah, and it's frustrating. It does suck almost how a lot of people, whether it is the color of their skin or, you know, like sexual orientation and stuff like that, feel like that they have to almost act in a certain way and hold themselves in a certain way just so that they can feel more accepted and feel like not alienated, which sucks because, you know, it's either be yourself and be alienated or not be yourself and be accepted, which is, you know, how many people really want that for their kids?
No.
Or for themselves.
It's one thing that this has brought to mind is whether or not how do you feel about the fact that as you said, it seems to be getting more popular to be like publicizing your love of various Asian cuisine or so
Yeah.
it's kind of like it's kind of popularized. How do you do you feel like that's a good thing? Do you think it's a bad thing? Is it kind of bordering on cultural appropriation? What are your feelings?
That's a really good question. So my personal feelings, and of course this like differs for every single person, but my personal feelings is I am To a certain extent, I am very glad because, yeah, now Korean culture and not just Korean culture, but Asian culture often is now seen in a different way, and people are starting to understand, starting to experience a lot of these things. And I'm glad that, you know, it's easier for me to find these Korean cuisine options and for people to act what they're like and to enjoy these ideas, and for people to watch certain types of TV shows or listen to certain kinds of music that I grew up with and people are enjoying, because it's really, really cool. It's just like if I were to show my friends like a cool book or like a cool TV show and I share that experience with them. But to a certain extent, even a little bit stronger, because this is stuff that I grew up with and stuff that I'm very proud of. But, you know, that line can be very, very fine sometimes, just like you said, where it can feel like it is appropriating sometimes of, specifically, it's when people who aren't of Asian heritage trying to tell me exactly how certain things in Asian culture are supposed to go, or like almost like the equivalent of mansplaining.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah,
like it doesn't happen that often, but every now and then it does. And then,
Yeah.
of course, just like I said, the fetishization of it as well. There were certain times back in college and stuff like that where people would try to call me pet names in Korean to like hit on me, and I was very uncomfortable by it. It was not by Korean people. I should throw that out there. It was by like very, very white girls who were like trying to call me Korean pet names, and I'm like. Thanks.
Swing and a miss.
Cool. Yeah, exactly. Glad. But then, yeah, to a certain extent, that kind of goes back to that video I created as well of like people. I'm very glad that this culture, like Asian culture, Korean culture, is being more seen in the spotlight, and people are starting to understand it better. But you also have to remember that I'm more than just my ethnicity, because like, yeah, I'm so glad that this is stuff that I'm proud of and that I can share with other people, but at the same time I don't want that to be my only characteristic that you see when you look at me. And, you know, telling me about how you know a Korean word is not going to be the best opening line or best way to, you know, like introduce yourself to me. Like that I'm a nuanced individual. I have more than one character trait when it comes to that.
I mean, I think that's very common for a lot of marginalized people. We're doing things like this as podcasts to highlight stories, but that doesn't mean that is the only element of that person. That's just the story that they want to tell to spread a bit more awareness or educate based on that particular situation. That does not make it the only aspect of them, whether it be disability, sexual orientation, or being of a particular race or culture. I feel like a lot of people can identify with that idea that they're constantly marginalized by that one aspect.
Yeah. And it's
just
go for it.
Sorry, I was just saying, because what you were saying a minute ago about the sort of fetishized shit, it is awkward. Fetishizing. Jack, there's gonna have to be a fucking like behind the scenes blooper reel at the end of this podcast. It's just like, how do fetishization of Asian culture and communities. So I remember being sort of 15. I went to London. One of the first times with friends, you know, the first time you're allowed to go on a day trip with other teenagers, and your parents are constantly texting you, and it's just like, fuck off, I'm trying to eat chips. Like, but there's a particular shop in London, and it's called Cyberdog, and Cyberdog is in a place called Camden, which is an alternative market, very cool place. But Cyberdog is a sort of, well, yeah, it's a sort of cyberpunkish store, lots of bright colours and lots of neon and alternative dress and tutus and lycra and all shit like that. But I do remember being very confused because I went in the shop and looked around and was like, this is all cool. You know, I could only wear it as an armband, but it's very cool. I like it. And you go down the stairs and there's a section which has a beaded curtain. I was like, oh no. And it wasn't just porn that I found there in this shop. It was specifically an Asian sex shop.
Oh.
As in, it was just hentai and but like sex
fun.
toys with Japanese characters on. But again, that's the first thing that I experienced when I went there was just.
I was going to say, I think I missed that section of Cyberdog.
It's when you get to the second floor, you go down one more floor, and they have an actual gated bit, which is just sex toys.
Oh my god!
Really?
Oh gosh!
Yeah.
Do you have to put in a code?
No. I think they just have a bouncer to make sure that. Well, actually, there are enough people giggling there and playing with lube anyway that it was confusing. But
You sure you didn't wander into Ann Summers?
no, that's fine.
Oh
Actually, there's less fetishization there. So, but no, it is incredibly weird because this was sort of, as I started hearing a lot more about, anime and different kinds of foods and things like that, and it wasn't as popular in school when I was in school. But yeah, the first thing I ever saw really to do with Asian culture in just a place in England was a sex shop, and it's not good, but it's no wonder that that's somehow where some people's first sort of assumptions came from, when that's the only thing we've been given to actually like consume. Which is so weird. Which is also, as you said, like when I go on Twitch, I don't see many like sort of Asian English speaking streamers, and it does make it very difficult to actually find people to hear from. And yeah, it's just definitely weird, because now you definitely will not find any teenage artist who has not watched and memorized every Ghibli film, or or who knows all about the main few animes and has that list, which is very popular to share, of ones that should be hated. And it's just, it feels very, I don't think this is the word, but tokenizing, as you say, was reducing it down to its stereotypes, which is unfortunately where I think this whole hate thing has come from, especially with one of the more recent attacks in America, which is being blamed on a sex addiction.
Yes, God, that was so frustrating. That specific story was sad, because there are a lot of people. There are a lot of people who I know and who've shared their experiences, both as either, a person who. Okay, let me restart this. It's kind of hard for me to word this, but I have a few friends who are half Asian, half white. And I also have a few friends who are white who have told me about their experiences with their parents specifically, of seeing them fetishize Asian women, and how it makes me really uncomfortable to hear, but at the same time, it's also good to like hear this perspective of like somebody who notices this very detrimental sort of behavior coming from their parents, of specifically seeing Asian women in this sort of light of like being obedient and being like following certain rules and stuff like that. And because of that carries over to a sexual sort of lens as well, of like, it's like the dominating towards like Asian women and stuff like that. It's super uncomfortable, but at the same time, I'm glad that a lot of people are able to talk about that, so that we can start like being like, what the hell is this? Like, no, you can't think that way. It's not okay for us to have these sorts of prejudices and these stereotypes, because guess what? It can continue snowballing into a situation like what happened, where, several women lost their lives because of someone who had this sex addiction, with the big old quotation marks again, and thinking that it's okay for him to exact his revenge on these Asian women just because his sexual desires and sexual fantasies weren't being fulfilled as far as he wanted.
It does kind of just boggle the mind, because that's one of the things that's, and I don't mean to speak over you at all. It's one of the things that frustrated me most about some of the hate attacks that I've seen. Is just that people are turning around saying, "Oh, we can't guarantee it's hate because they didn't say they don't like Asian people." And it's like, use your eyes, use your eyes. You're literally like you are racist because you're looking at people and making assumptions, but you can't look at the faces of those dead and actually come up with an idea. Like, no, it made me so angry, so fucking angry, and I can't imagine what it is actually like for an Asian person to have seen this and gone, what do they mean there's no connection?
Yeah, that was very, very Yeah, that was a upsetting day. I remember hearing about this. And then I could specifically talk about this case of hearing what happened at the massage parlor. And it was, I had a really tough time actually listening to it the first time, because I had a few friends reach out to me who were like, hey, have you heard about this? Hey, did you see what happened? And I was like, I need a few minutes. I need like a night to myself just after hearing all this, because it did bring up a lot of those memories, brought up a lot of those like fears, especially because it's hard for me to necessarily know, like, how can I know that it's not going to be like my grandparents next, or like my parents, or myself, or my brother, or something like that. How do I know for a fact that it's not going to happen? Because around the same time as that shooting, there were several churches in Seattle that were being vandalized with anti-Asian like threats. And that really scared me, because I was like, okay, well, shit, that's actually really close to where I live, and that's really, really close to where my grandparents are. So like, I really hope that they stay safe. So when I first heard all these things, I just needed a second to myself.
I mean, I think that's entirely understandable. It's the same principle as people coming into streams and telling people, oh, so and so has died. It's like, it's,
come on,
don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that for a start. But it's a case of people have real emotions, and they need time to process that to be able to respond. They shouldn't, in fact, you shouldn't expect a response from anyone to begin with. Like, it's entirely their choice of whether or not they want to put that out there. That's why you should never do that on a stream, especially. But yeah, I mean, I can understand it comes from a place of trying to see if you're all right. But at the same time, you need to be aware that they don't owe you a response.
True. That's very, very true. I think you put it beautifully. It's something that you have to be very, very aware of, because I don't blame anybody for trying to bring up these stories to me, because they want to make sure, A, that I'm okay, B, that I've heard about it, so that like I can potentially, you know, check in with my own family, or like make sure that they're okay. But it is something that you have to be very aware of, like, hey, this is going to affect people differently, and you know, it might trigger certain things for certain people. So be very, very careful, and like be very, very wary about it, and listen to like how the other person is responding, because if the other person is like, ooh, that's a little hard to hear, maybe you should be like, oh, okay, just kind of take that step back and try and understand their like social cues to see how they're responding to these sorts of situations. It's frustrating, it's scary, and I totally lost my train of thought of the question that we were originally asked, because I started going down this way.
Oh, I mean, this is how it's going to go. You know, we're going to go into rabbit holes and such forth. I mean, I've been thinking a lot all the time that you've been talking about how this has made you feel, and how it's like, oh, well, this is like, you know, near where my family are, or near where I am. It very much rings reminiscent to me for Sophie Lancaster, where it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, okay, so you can't specifically say that it's because of X, Y, or Z that this occurred, but you can't say it's not when it was very targeted and very and there was very much those kind of situations. And it's one of those things that's like, well, you need to be aware that, okay, in the event, maybe it wasn't, maybe these things nothing to do with that particular thing, and it was completely coincidental. Let's try and stretch it to that, and just take into the fact that people are going to identify with it, and people are going to feel connected to it, and even if it's not based on that, it is going to pull those threads. It's going to trigger those things for people. And that's the thing that we should be like focusing on, it, even if we don't feel it was that kind of situation.
Attack,
if
right?
yeah. If that made sense.
No, that completely makes sense to me. Yeah, like what you're trying to say is like, even if it wasn't racially targeted, even if it wasn't targeted towards a specific group, still be very aware that it can trigger certain things towards people. Okay, like hearing those stories of the old Chinese lady who I think it was like in LA or something, who had to fight back against a man who tried to hurt her because of the way that she looked, just on the street too, which is heartbreaking. Like that was a hard story for me to hear, because it just made me think of my own old grandma who doesn't really understand English that well and probably would need someone else to help like translate everything that she was saying. And you know, like I'm glad that I'm glad that she was okay, but boy, that story really affected me and like really hit me, because it's hard to hear those things and not be scared sometimes, that's why it's great that this sort of conversation is being talked about, and this light is to Asian voices across the US, or across the world, I should say, not just the US. Because it is a certain type of prejudice that has been a bit quieter, and I'm glad that it is being called out, especially after everything that has been happening with COVID specifically, and you know, people with power and higher up talking and blaming Asia or Asian people for this kind of for a disease that isn't their fault. It's good. It's good, and I'm glad that we're able to talk about it.
No one should have to fear walking down the street looking any particular way, or just sounding a particular way, or act, you know. It's like it's just it fills me full of very much rage that it's even still something that needs to be highlighted. But villainizing people for something that is completely and utterly outside of anyone's control. I'm sorry, as a biologist, I'm telling you now.
We don't get to choose it.
People don't get to choose when they get ill.
This is not freaking like Fallout 76. We're not like a character creation screen or anything like that.
Yes, I would like this very deadly disease that spreads extremely well. And let's go with that technique.
I want to play on hard mode. Let's go for it. No, like no one is freaking choosing that. This isn't their own choice. And then something that I wanted to bring up, the rage aspect that you said. I get mad. Like I got real mad that first day, especially hearing about those attacks. Like people at work, people like old people on the streets, and like churches and stuff like that. Those are the actions of cowards. Like, just to throw that out there and be completely blunt, like you're purposely targeting people who you don't see as threats, and you're purposely trying to target people who, you know, that you would have the least amount of like potential like fall back on of like trying to hurt. And that's just like it frustrates me. It makes me so mad, because I know that these people have such strong thoughts and such like horrible hate inside of them, and they're trying to hurt those who may not be able to, you know, stand up for themselves and stuff like that. And that was a big part of why I needed that second as well, of after hearing a lot of these stories that I talked about earlier, was because of just how mad I was, because of how I know, like, you can tell who they're targeting just because of how they, like, older people and like people at work, like you can tell that they're targeting specific groups if that's the case. And it's just like the actions of a coward.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, what could you possibly fear from someone that is physically incapable of fighting back?
Exactly. So it's just frustrating. It's very, very frustrating. But and Yeah, that rage aspect is something that has fallen over time. You know, I don't feel as mad about a lot of these things because I see a lot of people standing up and a lot of people saying, you know, saying what needs to be said and talking about it and starting these conversations, like the podcast today. But it's still there. You know, I still get so frustrated and so angry at, you know, people trying to push a lot of this rhetoric and a lot of this. A lot of these views of how like Asian Americans are to blame or Asians are to blame.
Yeah.
Well,
Sorry.
no, I just lost my train of thought there. So,
Right. So there was a couple of things. There was one thing I wanted to mention, and then there was one question I wanted to ask you, Dan, based on something you said a minute ago, just to throw off Drax's list of questions and keep on our toes. So first things first, just for people listening, allies are going to be massively important in this fight. We can't just leave marginalized people to fight for themselves, because that's the point. That's the thing about being marginalized. There is usually less of you than there are other people trying to attack you. And so allies are going to be very important. But if there's one thing you should not do, and please do not do this. Me and Drac talked about this earlier, and we both nearly rolled our eyes so hard we fell over. Do not post a yellow square on your Instagram. I on the one hand, I kind of understand where it came from in ignorance, in that some people thought they could post a black square for Black Lives Matter. Again, awful idea. All you did was hide information from people that needed to see it. But a yellow square is a racial caricature of someone's skin color. It's not that you're trying to draw attention. You're unfortunately using a racist symbol, as it were, to draw attention to the fact that people shouldn't be racist. So while being an ally is going to be incredibly important, you should try and educate yourself. And that's what me and Drac are always trying to do as well. And you may not be perfect and you may get something wrong. Just be really careful not to end up posting anything that's actually accidentally racist, because that's it. Oh God, not a good idea. But yeah, just steer away from posting colored squares. If you're going to post anything, a screenshot of a website or a picture of somebody who, you know, has been talking about these kinds of things, or, you know, an image from the media, if there is an appropriate one, just don't accidentally go with a racial.
It very much brings to, like, you know, you remember the chain messages in Facebook to where they were private messaging like your friends of like, pass this message on to your friends to raise awareness about like this like various cancers usually. And it was like, that does absolutely fuck all other than make a meme of no one's
formative action you can take. You didn't read, you didn't listen, you just saw something shiny and said, oh, I can share this.
Yeah.
I can get some clicks.
That's not what being an ally is. I mean, we've been over this with like the LGBTQIA community as well. It's being an ally and isn't just being like, well, I'm not homophobic and I'm not racist and I'm not I'm not ableist. It's you're actively anti. Yes, you are active about it. You are highlighting people's stories. You are trying to make the world more like you want it to be, in the sense of being anti that.
Yeah, and you don't do that by accidentally perpetuating racism. No. So it's more out of ignorance, I think, than anyone actually doing this because it's lol. And, you know, haha, it will be funny. We can own the peoples. But, yeah, just be careful. And the other thing I wanted to ask, Dan, was because when you were mentioning about your lunch as a kid, I remember seeing that conversation the other day in like a Black community on Twitter, like an account for Black communities to come together and talk. And they described it as a microaggression. And I'm guessing there's a lot of them. Are there any... So that's why I want to bring up along this yellow square idea. Are there any other kinds of microaggressions that you do see from people that may simply be out of ignorance, or, you know, sort of accidental. They just don't know it's bad, because those are some of the things I think allies especially need to work on, where you don't know, or you didn't realize, or you just think it's funny, and it's not a joke if you're the only person laughing.
Yeah. So
I guess that was my next question anyway.
Yeah, no worries. I think we kind of talked about this briefly earlier about things that I was talking about as like stereotypes, but microaggressions, that's a real thing. Just like you said, it is a microaggression to call out someone by their for the food that they make, because it's not necessarily something that's overtly like but it is definitely something that does affect the way that Korean culture or myself are viewed. Oh, am I good? Sorry, you guys.
Yep, okay. You're good. You got
Sorry
for a second, but we're okay.
Yeah. I was wondering because I noticed that on my side too. Okay, but yeah. So, some other microaggressions that I even brought up earlier, being called like really smart or really good at math or things like that. I growing up, I was a very studious kind of kid and stuff like that. But there are certain times where like people make that assumption that I'm really good at something or really smart at something or really hardworking at something, which is a positive stereotype, as with the big old quotation marks around positive, and maybe a positive sort of stereotype, but it does also hold that idea of like holding people of a certain skin color or people who look a certain way as in this very limited sort of circle and only being seen as smart. And then at the same time, that also discounts a lot of other things, you know, because of that, the whole like nerd kind of like stereotype, like Asian, like nerdy Asian kind of stereotype was perpetuated as well. And because of that, that can affect like the way that we view ourselves in different ways, like our own, what's the word I'm looking for?
Self-esteem. Like it can affect your own self-image.
Exactly. Yeah, it affects a lot on self-image, because it's like, okay, cool, if I'm only seen as like this nerdy sort of person, I don't feel like the most like attractive sort of person or something like that. And then also it also holds you to a certain extent of like, okay, if I am not really smart, if I'm not working hard, does that make me less Asian? Does that make me less of like the skin color that I am in front of you? So that's one of the microaggressions that I bring up often, is that like, even though it seems like a positive sort of positive stereotype, it's a microaggression that you should be very aware of. Or yeah, and then some other ones that I have experienced, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, but I talked a little bit about it, of like my grandpa not being able to speak English and stuff like that. Oftentimes people thinking that just because someone doesn't know how to speak English, they don't necessarily, like they're not all there, or like that they're confused, or they might not be the brightest. It's one that isn't explicitly said, but a lot of people do treat people who don't speak English a very different way, and like in almost like a babyish sort of way sometimes. But my grandpa was like a high school teacher who like taught at one of like the biggest like colleges ever. He was in the army, and like he worked with a lot of soldiers during the Korean War and stuff like that. He's a man who like I respect and like look up to a lot, and it just reminds me of that one line from, I can't remember what TV show it was, but it just brings up the line of like, in English, like if you could understand my language, I would be like 100 times smarter than you actually think I am. Because just so much of that is lost, and this focus on English speaking countries oftentimes makes it so that if you don't know how to speak English, you are seen in kind of this negative sort of light. And it is something that has frustrated me over the years, because it's crazy to see how like my grandpa, who is one of the smartest men that I know like in my entire life, is kind of treated very differently. Or like that one story I told you where someone was yelling at him for not necessarily understanding what was happening, and being seen and being called like these negative things just because they don't understand what's being said. Yeah, those are the ones that really jump out to me when I think about microaggressions.
I feel like in terms of thinking that someone who is struggling with English in a situation is very much a imagine what you would be if you were in a different country where the main language is not English and you need to ask for help. Can I have a beer?
The simple ones. Hello, where's the bathroom?
Yeah, right?
You got a handful.
Doesn't make you any less who you are. It just means that you aren't capable of communicating in the way that you need to get the thing across that you need to.
Exactly.
And it's not up to the other person to know the language to make you more comfortable.
Definitely, I 100% agree with you on that. Gosh, it just reminds me of when I was in. I went to Korea. I want to say 4 years ago at this point. It was either 4 or 5 years ago, and obviously I am Korean. I'm Korean American, but I don't know Korean super well because I grew up in America almost my entire life. So when I was there, I was like, I would try to ask people questions in my super broken Korean, and they would look at me and they'd be like, "What are you like?" They'd be like, "Oh," and then I would be like, "Oh, I'm from America," and they're like, "Oh, okay, gotcha, okay, that helps out a lot." And then they would like try to talk, like they would either try and respond to me like as well as they possibly could, or they would just like if they knew any English or if they knew someone who spoke English, they would try and find someone like that. But it's really funny to be on the other side of that as well. And just like you said, like imagine if you were in that situation of like you are thought and you are held to this sort of like the standard of like you must be able to speak English. If you live here in America, you have to speak English, which isn't necessarily true because there are hundreds and thousands of immigrants who don't necessarily have the best grasp at English, but they're still able to live their life, and they shouldn't have to necessarily learn English if that's not what they're most comfortable with. Because guess what? That doesn't really affect you that much. Like if someone's not speaking English, that's not really going to hurt you.
We need to stop trying to find justifications for why victims are being victimized and stop victimizing people. Because you can't just say, "Oh, well, she should have worn a longer skirt." It's like, no, somebody shouldn't have attacked her, or he shouldn't have been accidentally cutting in queue at the store. It should have been that bloke shouldn't have yelled at your granddad and should have said, "Sorry, I'm in the queue." Like,
exactly.
We need to stop putting the onus on the victims as to why they deserve to have been victimized.
Quite often I feel it comes from a place of not being able to step into someone else's shoes. Being so blindsided by your own perspective that you don't step into that person's shoes in those particular situations and think, wait a second, likelihood is that person hasn't fucking realised I'm here. Like, the world does not revolve around me. Oh god, they just didn't realise. It's not an attack.
My mum at the bank.
What?
So my mum is in a wheelchair, and I took her into the bank.
God.
And the manager of the bank was walking backwards to do this fancy showboating to all these like people that were with them, probably investors. And he's got his book in one arm and his iPad in the other, and he's walking backwards doing this swagger, and then he trips on the footrest and sits on my mum, who has one leg, and we're just both like, what the fuck just happened? And he jumped up like a shot and was just like, oh! And everyone else is like, oh my god, Dave, what the fuck did you just do? And
oh my god.
I used to think it was really funny, and then I realised, like, people just need to really be just a little bit more careful with each other. Like, just...
Jesus.
Jeez,
oh my god! I thought
be aware that other people exist.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jesus. Okay, I thought you were saying someone purposely sat in your
I was a bit like,
just because she was in a wheelchair.
Like the scariest random game of Duck Duck Goose ever. Just didn't know who was playing, and then.
But this is the thing. It's just more about being aware of someone other than yourself. Trying to have a perspective of other people around you.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. And I think sometimes it is hard for people to know if they grew up in a certain way. You know, if you grow up in a very, very sheltered sort of area, or area where, you know, outside information may not be as easy to get to. I'm specifically talking about like those tiny little towns where, like, you know, populations aren't as, they're not like metropolises or anything like that, or maybe internet access wasn't as easy. It makes a bit more sense where people, that sort of xenophobia does come into place, and they're like, oh, well, it's not something I'm used to, and I don't feel like as comfortable with like these ideas. But it's something that you have to take steps towards yourself. You can't expect someone to
I
flip
very
a
much
switch or
agree with
something.
this.
Yeah.
Coming from one of those places. As I've mentioned previously on the podcast, my family are those people. They are racist. They are homophobic. They are very ableist, and they can't see outside of their own perspective. And I've grown up in that situation, and I was there, and I knew, you know, that was all I knew. I was brought up in that situation. But the point is that you are your own person, and you can seek the education to undo all of that. It trust me, it's hard. I'm not saying it's like the easiest thing ever to suddenly reprogram everything that you've been brought up as a child, because I mean, children are at the most vulnerable stage, and they are brought up in a certain way, and it is very difficult to undo those things. But it's possible, and you should want to do that. You should want to educate. You should want to improve your interactions with other people, your knowledge, and I mean, for me as a kid, that it was very uncomfortable, because I didn't agree with what I was being told, but it was all I was being told, and there was no one else to refer to interact with, because it was it was a place that was very arse end of Yorkshire, with no bloodier
civilization around with the cows.
Yeah, pretty much. And everyone, it basically, how to sum it up is, where I lived, you shouted down the street to get my stepdad, called John, and 4 people came out and went, help. And and that's the kind of place it was. It was a farm area. There was no one really to work with. But the moment I got to uni, it was, oh my god, the joy I had of just discovering what people really could be like, and realizing that the reason I felt weird was because I'm not homophobic. I'm I'm bisexual.
That's why I feel different, because I don't agree with them. That's the reason why.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's possible. It's not something that's, you know, you're stuck with for life, to just be that way that your parents have told you how to be. It's
not knowing something doesn't make you a bad person, and having a point of view that isn't necessarily something that a lot of people agree with doesn't make you a bad person. As we always say, it's when you're presented with new information, if you refuse to acknowledge it because it doesn't fit your agenda, that's what makes you an asshole. Like, unfortunately, a very certain Cheeto-coloured person crossing out the word Corona and writing the word China. Because it fit the agenda, unfortunately, which is why a lot of this shit came about.
Yeah, that is heartbreaking, and it's hard too, because a lot of it is, I know that sometimes that people don't necessarily want to believe those certain things, or they do want to grow or like be different people, but it's a step that you have to take yourself. It's looking at your own agendas, just like you said, looking back and trying to understand, why do I think certain things? Why do I believe certain things? And then growing from that, being able to grow from that is very, very important. And it's a hard step to take. But you have to understand your own prejudices before you can continue on this conversation and like continue understanding how you can help, and then also potentially help figure out why you have these prejudices and grow as a person.
And not to speak over you at all, Dan, but if anyone is a white ally like me, and me and Drac call ourselves allies because we actively try to learn more. That's not us saying, oh, we're fantastic, because no, we're just people. But I think me and Drac can say we're good allies, because for all different kinds of people, we keep trying to learn. If we do something wrong, we do something wrong. But it's like, my God, if we hadn't learned and changed, I don't know, Drac, whether you had this in school, but talking about microaggressions about Asian people. So I don't think I went to school with an Asian person until I was in secondary school, at least. I know I had my first black teacher when I was 14, who was my chemistry professor. But I remember there was a fucking like children's nursery rhyme that was about Asian people's eyes, and you grabbed your eyes by the corners and you pulled them up or down for what kind of Asian person you were trying to be. But as a kid, we didn't know that was bad. We just thought it was,
and it was normalized.
Essentially, fucking cosplay. You know, it's.
Oh my God! Yeah.
But I still don't know where that came from. And again, when I got older, I was like, wait, actually, that's really weird. Why is that a song? What the fuck?
Yeah. Well, that's the kind of stuff that I was talking about.
Yeah.
Is that level of, wait, what the
where did that come
fuck?
from? Yeah. And like, no, of course, I'm not proud of doing that as a kid, but I also know as a kid, I had no fucking clue what it actually meant.
True, yeah. And if you did it and nobody called you out for it, then hey, you're just like, okay, cool, it's just another little silly nursery rhyme. Gotta love that.
In fact, the chat may be correct. A lot of people may have been copying things like the Aristocats, which had the Siamese cat.
Yeah,
which obviously the breed is correct. They are a breed of cat called Siamese cat. Yeah. But the We Are Siamese, If You Please song, there's a lot of very racist Disney.
Yeah, early Disney.
There's a lot of very wrong things with Disney.
Oh, yeah.
People are like, oh, I miss the golden age. And I was like, oh, cool,
no, you miss being able to be a dickhead and not getting called out for it. That's what you miss.
I miss the white ages. That's what I like. Yeah.
Honestly, it was easier.
Yeah.
But that's the thing.
So
I mean,
no one take that out of context. In inverted commas.
So many people, so many kids were brought up with that kind of input in their lives. And if you add that to, like, my situation, a family very much going towards the negative side of things, it is no surprise that we still have these problems. But the point is that you're your own bloody person.
Yeah.
Bloody, you know, as you said, Paige, you got to a point and you realised, oh fuck, that's some shit right there.
Yeah.
Get to that point. That's the
point where you get to look back, and because guilt's a really bad thing. And if you did something, and again, I'm going to say it was a disabled slur or something, because that's something I can personally speak about. I'm not going to speak on race because I am a white British woman. I'm as milquetoast as you get. But if you said something, I'm not going to say that, oh, you're the worst, I expect you to feel guilty. I would love you to feel excited you've got an opportunity to learn and get to like learn something cool and actually be proud of yourself instead next time you get to say something and say it right, as it were. Like, I think that's a fantastic experience to have, to actually be like, oh, I did it right this time. I made somebody happy. Awesome. Like, I'm not personally going to blame you. Again, it is different depending on what the thing is, what you have done, what you have said.
I think when
but
it
always
comes
try and
to
find an opportunity to learn.
I think when it comes to racism in that sense, however, it's the fact that it's got to a point where there's just anger. It's just anger now. Like, people have pushed it so far and it's gone on so long that is it any wonder that people are being outspoken about it, and you know, there's protests, and it's gone on so long. And so it's very difficult for I assume everyone who's affected to turn around and go, okay, well let's educate you at this point, because that was like that was way back down the line at this point. This now is it's more of a no, you educate yourself.
That's why I was only trying to say that, speaking from something I can speak on, that's never to say that my experience is, it's not to conflate, say, disability and race issues. They are very, very different. I'm more talking about somebody learning that there's more they can learn and that they can be proud of having learned. But I mean, Dan, what about your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, just like you guys have said, when it comes to these experiences, I think it just boils down to make sure that you listen to the people who the marginalized voices, which is a great reason why this podcast and like the event that you held was like a good idea. It's like, make sure that you listen to those voices, make sure that you give a platform for those voices, make sure that you are actually listening to those voices and not just trying to like argue back or tell your experiences from it, but just listen to what they've got to say. That's a big part of it. But then at the same point, don't ever expect someone who is marginalized to, you know, teach you exactly how you should grow and how you should grow from this situation. Because it's not their job. It's not my job to teach people about how to treat Asian Americans, or for me to teach everyone like the prejudices that Asian Americans do go through. I'm telling you my experiences, but this is not like, I should not be the only person or the only way that you learn about these experiences. You should be able to learn yourself. You should be able to go out and try and look at your own, you know, and internalize, look at all of your internalized prejudices and stuff like that, because I can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very much so. It also brings me on to the next question here, of how do you feel the platform, Twitch in general, can be improved to aid in a BIPOC inclusive environment?
Yeah, God, that's always hard, isn't it? Because Twitch tries really hard sometimes and they just miss it sometimes. They shoot for the moon and then they end up at Saturn sometimes. It's weird. It's so strange because it's hard, because on one hand, I feel like Twitch does do their best to try and like make it as accepting, but then there are situations where, like, you know, automod only catches certain words that are super, I mean, we were even talking about this right before we went live, like how automod will find certain words that don't seem offensive at all, but let other ones through without a freaking blink sometimes. So I think right now, when it comes to Twitch, I think Twitch should be able to elevate and give those voices towards Asian American content creators, and let them have a chance to talk about their experiences and continue, you know, putting them in the spotlight as well. I think the way that they did Black History Month and being able to give a lot of Black creators like a space and a platform for them to use their voices to talk about their experiences, I thought that actually went pretty well. Of course, they've had a lot of other issues where they run into some issues with trying to do things outside of like giving them a voice, and running into issues outside of that. But I think just purely based off like trying to give a voice and like showcasing some of these Black creators, they did a relatively good job on doing that. So I think that could easily be extended towards other people, other content creators of color, other marginalized voices, et cetera, et cetera. But I think, because if that isn't happening, if that isn't being showcased, and if those voices aren't being shown, then it'll just continue being accepted, and it'll continue being seen as like the the norm if people are able, if nobody is calling this out.
It's very similar to.
And I'd like to say that, like, okay.
Sorry, I just heard a gap there, and I was like, "Oh, okay, is this finished?" And no, it was the internet cutting out again. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. You go ahead.
I very much feel it's the standard that we hold streamers to, right? Yep. Streamers are a role model to their community. Basically, your community will reflect the actions of the streamer 80% of the time. Obviously, you're going to have various people that aren't going to do that, but you know, you are the representative. You are held to a standard, and your community will take from you their, you know, how they should act. So Twitch should really be held to that same standard. Twitch should be aiming to be that role model for its creators, for its communities, and for streaming platforms. And I feel like they kind of still miss the boat on that and aren't listening to their communities when they should be. But I'm hoping that that's going to change.
Yeah. I definitely think it's going to be something that will take a while, obviously. Like, everything, and I think that's just in general. I think it's hard to break away from these prejudices, and like I said, there are a lot of people who can't and have a tough time with doing that, or just aren't able to right now. But like, hopefully with time, as time keeps changing, as mindsets keep changing, as new generations keep growing up, and like they're able to see these hear these voices and see these potential role models and stuff like that. Hopefully we can make a change that way, and hopefully we can start working towards that better, you know, that better change.
Yeah.
And also, you know, as Twitch keeps growing as well, that could be something that follows along with it, because, you know, I feel like the younger generation is kind of like a toss-up sometimes. I guess every single generation talks about, you know, how crazy, how kooky the younger generation is all the time. But
dumb kids.
Yeah, but that's I feel like it's kind of a toss-up sometimes of being able to tell exactly like if things are going to keep growing, or if kids are necessarily listening to the, you know, experiences of those older. But I think being able to have those voices and to give those platforms, just like I said, for the future, and it could help those future generations continue learning.
Okay, so I have one audience question for us to finish up on.
Let's hear it. Sounds good.
Before you do, though, I will quickly say, just for anyone watching right now, we are still running our little charity incentive. Well, not incentive. What's the word I'm looking for? Charity fundraiser at the moment for Stop AAPI Hate. You can see it at the top there. You type charity, !charity into the chat. Stop AAPI Hate are a centre who track and respond to instances of hate, violence, harassment, discrimination, shunning, and bullying against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the US. Obviously, that's a lot of what we're talking about. So if Dan has said anything that has made you think, given you, you know, education, or helped bring you up to speed on some ideas and some things, then do consider dropping a few dollars. You literally go to the link and you can choose how much you want to donate in dollars. And that'll go towards the goal there, which is part of a bigger fundraiser in itself. Just wanted to bring that one up.
Which is awesome.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you guys are running these fundraisers. They're always really, really, it's good to see. And I talked about this a while ago, but like it makes me happy to see all of these content creators that I surround myself with, to be able to talk about these sorts of ideas and, you know, stand up for what they believe in, and like, wanting to make that kind of change. And like, to bring that back to the previous question, I think a lot of people, you know, whether the size of their platform or you know, like whatever their voice is, whether it is Twitch or Twitter or whatever it might be, it makes me happy to see that there are people who can use their voice towards hoping to make these changes and aren't just sitting around and, you know, letting it happen, which makes me really, really happy.
Right. So, audience question. In terms of education, how much Asian national specific history is around in the teaching where you are, and what can schools do to improve this?
Ooh. Well, I think a big part of that also depends on the type of school that you went to. I went to a public high school. And prior to public high school, I don't think I knew anything about Asian culture. Well, that's a weird way of wording it. I didn't learn anything through school that had to do with Asian culture or anything like that. The full extent of that, I think, in high school was probably like my world history class. Learning about, you know, like the different ages, like the ages of China, and like a little bit about like Japan. I guess it was mostly China too, which I think about, at least that was for me personally. I don't know how much different it is in Europe for you guys, but the full extent of like my world history class was like learning how China grew so much, a little bit about Japan and feudalism, and then bare minimum of any other, you know, any other Asian country. India, I guess, a little bit, but yeah, mostly India, China, and a little bit of Japan, I guess, were like the full extent of my Asian history classes for me.
I don't think we ever had an Asian history class ever in my schools. I think the closest thing was religious studies class discussing some more prevalent Asian religions, and that was it. But it was by a Christian teacher, so you can imagine how well that went.
Yeah.
But no, mostly we studied ancient Egyptians and Rome, and what a tectonic plate is, because apparently that is, you know, because that comes into what part of the world is made up of, and some places are on plates and some aren't. Did you know? Like,
Cool.
yeah, no.
I love ancient history.
Unfortunately, I think a lot of schools,
that's real ancient history.
A lot of schools and a lot of places obviously have agendas, as it were. Like in England, we are never taught that it was a fucking, that, you know, we're never taught that Queen Victoria was an absolute dick who stole stuff from many other countries and eroded people, and, you know, didn't say anything against slavery and all that. We're just taught that, oh, she lived for a long time and had a big diamond. It's like, yeah, a diamond that came from India that she fucking nicked. Like, yes, the empire was not a good thing. It still hurts people today. And unfortunately, I think, like, in America, I know that we often hear things like, that's why a lot of American movies will show America's the good guy in wars, whereas it's not always exactly the case. In England, we always show the brave, like, lieutenants going about it with their guns, and they're honourable people. It's like, no, that's not exactly what happened in a lot of schools teach kids what they wish history was, not what it actually was. And so we never learned anything about Asian countries at all because they were too busy telling us how the white man was fantastic.
See,
yeah,
it's interesting to hear, actually, because on my side we got two bits. It was here's the, you know, wonders of the world, and Hail Britannia.
Britannia rolled waves, something, I don't know.
Very much we conquered the world, and it was very much celebrated in my history classes, and there was no mention of how bad it was, or that it was actually a bad thing. Oh, and then the wars. Oh,
yeah, but did you not know we saved the peoples who couldn't save themselves? No, that unfortunately, especially in England, we are very much taught in our classes that we were the good people all the time. Ignore the genocide, ignore the people that you've hurt, ignore the slavery, ignore the stripping of rights and the colonialism and the barbarism, because that could never happen. We've got a stiff upper lip and a very nicely trimmed moustache, and
we don't mention women getting the vote either, because that's.
No. But at the same time, we never talk about the negatives, the things that happened during that. England shoves stuff under the rug a lot, and the minute our rug is on top of a fucking mountain. Because even now, yeah.
I feel like the US is very similar to that, unless you take like some of those deeper history classes. The US is pretty cool. I'm so glad that we helped finish up World War II, and George Washington was a great man. Let's ignore all of the slaves. And so was Thomas Jefferson. Let's ignore all of the slaves. And then, yeah, I think that is often kind of like what you said. There's a certain rhetoric, there's a certain message that a lot of these history classes are trying to push along.
History isn't about what happened. History is about what the country wants you to know.
History is written by the victor. That's literally it. And whichever country believes itself to be the victor will teach that. And it happens in every single country. And I'm not just again, I can only speak for England because that's where I was born and this is where I still live and this is where I went to school. Definitely. But as far as I understand, it comes from non-white countries as well, like non-predominantly white countries as well, will teach that whatever happened in their history was absolutely right. And it's, that is the bit we celebrate. And it's only when you start talking to other people that it's like, oh, actually, no, this didn't quite happen the way that we think, or, actually this happened, which is why, and this is a little bit out of left field here, me saying this, but it does relate to my schooling. This is why you still get people who are Holocaust deniers, because, we weren't taught that in schools we were the bad guys, or that we weren't taught in schools that we didn't go in to help people in time because we were too busy doing this, that, or everything else. And, in my school, we actually had a Holocaust survivor come and speak to us. And some people were still like, are you sure? It was like, yes, she's got the fucking tattoo. Oh my God, yes.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that woman was a fucking badass. She was amazing. But I just, it upsets me that we don't get to understand the true complexity of history. And by not teaching people the shit that's happened, it may happen again because people don't know how to notice the signs. Which is why this, again, going back to our topic of Asian hate, this is why some of what we know now, from what we never got taught in schools, happened between, predominantly white countries and Asian countries, is happening again because nobody ever told them how to stop it. That nobody actually said, by the way, this happened once before. You might want to look out for that. That's why you get films like Around the World in 80 Days that has, fucking Jackie Chan as a sidekick to the smart white character. It's like that. No, it was that. You can't pick and choose.
Yeah, and I think being able to learn, it's hard too, because obviously it's a high school or like public schools and stuff like that don't really pay their teachers that much. So obviously they're just going to teach what they have to teach and stuff like that. And because of that, and of course, school is only so many years as well. It's hard to teach someone like the entirety of the culture of every single culture that you grow up in. And then of course, there are a lot of things that are, unique to your area. Like I learned the life cycle of a salmon in like 5th grade. And that is something that I don't think every single person in even the US necessarily learns. So like, that was like a part of like my history class was like learning about salmon in Washington. So we learned that. And I always bring that up because it's so different. Schools are so different across like states and countries that like it's hard for us to necessarily see eye to eye when it's so difficult and difficult for us to understand the perspectives of other people if we don't necessarily know what they learn. And I think, you know, higher education is a great way to like learn that, like colleges, even high schools and stuff like that should be better about that, in my personal opinion. But of course, you know, high school or college can be something that is, you know, too expensive or hard, not as accessible for a lot of people. So yeah, I think part of it is like the education system, completely like related, but also like a weird tangent, is like the education system does need to be like revamped and changed in order to help out a lot of people and help those perspectives and help people know where they're coming from.
Yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts on schooling, but we'll discuss that another day, I think. But yeah, I mean, I never even went to university because it was one of those things that, you know, everyone was saying, oh, if you want a job, you've got to go. And I was like, I'm gonna go get a job now. Actually, I think I'm just gonna, I don't really want to pay, because this was right when all the prices were going up in England as well. It's like, I don't really want to pay 30 grand a year. I don't think I've ever, my family are all disabled. I don't think we've ever even seen 30 grand. I'm gonna go get a job in a shop. And now I actually get to do this and talk with people, whereas, and it's not to say that other people's decisions was wrong, but some of the people I know who went to university dropped out immediately, didn't want it, and now don't know what to do. And it's like, the path you take, it's right to you. But I do agree that schooling needs to be overhauled, more tailored towards people, and actually be truthful. There's so much stuff that gets swept under the rug. And again, this isn't against any teachers. Teachers themselves get told what their curriculum is, and then they put together the stuff and they teach it because they are overworked, underpaid, fucking shoved in classrooms full of 30 kids whose parents don't give a shit about coronavirus. And, you know, I really, really feel for teachers. And what they do is fantastic, but I wish that they were given the license to be actually be able to say, this wasn't actually how this happened. Here's a 5-minute YouTube video by somebody who actually knows, and they wrote it. Because I mean, the only reason I found out about some of the things that have happened was through a series called Horrible Histories, which it was a set of books, and they're not perfect. They're absolutely not perfect. They don't have the best information. They do have a little bit of the yay me pat on the back going on, but they did have things in there like, during the war this and this happened, and these people did this thing, and then these people turned up here and here, and actually England did this to these people. And it was like, oh my god, wow. And then like, did you know that people actually got trench foot? I'm like, no, I was told that everyone came home healthy. Oh, what do you mean many people died of infection? Oh god. And I'm not saying we should necessarily be teaching 6-year-olds about genocide, but we should teach them that not everyone has been good throughout history.
I disagree. I think that
I don't mean in explicit terms we shouldn't be, but we should be teaching kids that things that have happened in history haven't always been good.
I was reading medical books when I was 6. Like, seriously, it does not damage the children beyond repair. Says the person with anxiety and depression and very.
I was going to say that in a sort of slightly tongue-in-cheek way, but it does depend on the kid. And I'm trying to say, if you're trying to teach a kid a group of 30 kids, you might want to just have that information available, but also just be like, more information is available, but here's what everyone can digest, and then there's more for other kids that can take it on.
Yeah, like, I mean, there's ways of putting it that doesn't traumatize. Yeah, but it more the point of like, I think we shelter kids in the wrong ways.
Oh yeah. And then that leads, unfortunately, to things like Dan experienced as a kid, where you get learned experiences from parents or from other kids or from TV shows, which kids may not understand the nuance in saying something like, your food smells funny. Like, where did they get that? If it was actually meant as a microaggression, they got that from somewhere. I very much doubt a child just came up with it on the fly and was like, this is the perfect way to be a dick. Like, all of it is learned. And it makes me really mad that schools don't actually teach then.
Yeah. It's very, very frustrating.
Sorry, we've completely tangented because I went out.
That's totally fine. I think that's fine because, you know, like the education system is like a big part of like not giving marginalized voices the voices that they need, and it is something that has to be changed. So yeah, I think out of all the potential tangents that we could have taken, I think this is a totally good one.
Yeah, I think we've got a little longer left. Drac, unless you had a question, I did have one as well, but I like to
no,
ask.
I've run out of questions.
All right,
So.
good. So one I like to ask, because I'm always looking for more things to binge. Good representations of, I guess, either Asian Americans or Asian civilization. That's not the right word. I meant like community, but also like maybe throughout history, things like that. Are there any sort of standout things that make you think, oh, actually, yeah, people might understand a bit more if they watched or read or listened to X? Are there any things that you just really enjoy?
Ooh, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. I'm trying to think of some good ones off the top of my head. Just that kind of goes over like Asian culture and like how it feels like to like grow up that way. Oh God, there's one that I want to suggest, but I can't remember for the life of me the name of the movie. I think a big part of it too is like, let me see if I can find it. Let me do a quick Google search while I'm doing this. I can't really think of any other ones off the top of my head. I've heard a lot of good stuff about that new movie that is coming out, or has come out, I think very recently, of, what is it called? It's called Minari.
I've heard about it.
Yes, it's about a Korean family that moves to a southern state in the US and tries to follow their, American dream. And from what I have seen from like the commercials and stuff like that, it looks like a very emotional movie and like a movie that I would love to watch. I just haven't had the chance to watch it off the top of my head. Recently, there was one. God, I am trying to remember that.
Yeah.
What about ones that really are bad at representation?
Oh, really bad?
Yeah.
God, any movie that has a white person playing an Asian person, don't ever do that. And I'm not just talking about like those old ones, like was it Breakfast at Tiffany's or something? I'm talking about like recent ones as well, of like the movies that have like Scarlett Johansson or shoot, who was it? Emily Elizabeth, one of the redheaded starlets from recently. They had her playing like a Hawaiian, like half Asian, half white person. And then there was what was it? Ghost in the Shell with freaking Scarlett Johansson. Yeah, please don't. Yeah, that's just frustrating, and I don't know.
It's not difficult to find an Asian actress, and if it is, you've not done your work.
Exactly, you're finding the wrong people. Just because you have a big name doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a good choice.
Right.
I actually am really excited for the Mortal Kombat movie just because of that too. The first thing that I said when I was watching that trailer was, thank God they got Asian people to play the characters, because I swear if they had like Ryan Reynolds playing like Scorpion or some shit, I was gonna be like, I'm gonna cancel this freaking movie in a second. But like it's weird how refreshing that was too, of me like watching this big, well, I'm assuming it's gonna be a big, like this big movie from a big franchise actually have non-white people as playing the non-white characters. I was like, heck yeah, I'm actually really excited. And it's bloody and gory and really like action-packed. This is great. Freaking finally.
Yeah. It was brilliant. Well, I watched the trailer the other day because obviously with a new one coming out, a lot of the film channels I watch started covering the old Mortal Kombat movie. Ooh. And Jesus Christ, it's bad. It's so bad. Again, still a decent amount of representation, I think, with characters actually played by Asian actors, which is cool. Still a bit stereotyped, a bit weird, but it's it was a slight pleasant surprise to see. But yeah, this new one looks fucking excellent.
Yeah, and it doesn't it doesn't seem like as stereotyped or anything like that. And I'm actually really excited. And I think that kind of actually brings it back, is like, I think most movies that are just slice of life and show off like Asian American actors, like most of those are ones that really stand out to me, just because it shows that you can have an American story, like an American dream, or just like, Eurocentric, like, whatever it is. You can have those stories and your main character doesn't have to be white. and it doesn't have to be like the biggest part of the movie. There's actually this is going to be really dorky, but there's this 3-part like rom-com series on Netflix that's called like To All the Boys or something. I watched it because I'm a sucker for rom-coms. But like it's about a girl who like writes a whole bunch of letters to a whole bunch of boys that she used to like back in elementary school, and then accidentally being sent out. And this is really dorky, but the main character is half Korean, half white, but it's never a big part of the movie. And like it just follows like this story with like all of like her and her sisters, and her mom passed away unfortunately, but like her and her mom she had a Korean mom and she passed away, but it still was able to tell this story and show that, you know, a normal Asian American story act and just so normalized and so normal, and it was just fun and it was cute. And those kinds of movies are the ones that I really like things like that. Movies like, and Netflix has a whole bunch of them recently too, which I'm actually very proud of. There's that one movie
about to say there are a bunch of like because they're going really ham on the whole live action animes at the moment, and obviously there are some really atrocious ones that we're not going to mention because they can go die in the hole that they were formed in. And then there's some really good ones, like Full Metal Alchemist. Have you seen?
Oh, I have not seen.
Okay, Full Metal Alchemist live action. The entire cast, and it was just amazing. Like it's just the entire cast were Asian, and it just. It worked so well, and it just everything was just really good, and I just feel like we need more of that.
Right, I'm a massive horror fan, and I actually will say 3 of my favorite horror movies at the minute are all Korean.
Yeah, Korean horror movies really great. I freaking love Korean horror movies.
Like Train to Busan is one that everyone will always bring up.
So good.
That film is amazing. It does have some stereotypes, but it has them in characters which everyone else is just like, what the fuck are you doing? Like ridiculous. Like Train to Busan is the perfect, most gut-wrenching horror movie. Absolutely fantastic.
Alive, take note of all these because I've been looking for.
Alive is a fairly new one. It is a Netflix exclusive.
Yes.
Alive
That's
is
a TV show. Yeah.
No, this one's a film. I think.
Oh, what am I thinking of? Oh, I'm thinking of Sweet Home, which is also like
that's
very,
also
very
fantastic. Yes, Sweet Home's amazing. But yeah, Alive is a horror film set in Korea, I believe. In a huge block of flats, teenage boys are sort of 17, 18. He's a live streamer, and he gets a text from his family to lock the doors, and his family are stuck somewhere. And it turns out a zombie virus has begun. But it's basically filmed in 2 flats, him and another lady who lives across the way, and the hallways, and that's it. This entire horror film is set between 2 rooms and a hallway. And it's fantastic, absolutely brilliant. So it's absolutely fantastic, and the lead actor is very, very good as well. But yeah, Alive is fantastic. And the other one, and I'm interested to see what you think, because again, a lot of the channels that I watch, so things like Dead Meat, Found Flicks, oh god, there's so many of them, I can't remember everyone now. But Parasite. Which
oh my god! Oh wait, no, I have seen Parasite.
Parasite, I think, is amazing because it isn't one of those like representation. Positive representation doesn't have to be sunshine and rainbows. I think for whatever group you're representing, it's only when it's only shit that it gets very grating. But I think Parasite had such an incredible message and so fucking well acted.
It is. It's such a good movie. Parasite's a 10 out of 10 movie. It just because of the way that it completely just catches you off guard too, which I think is part of it, of like how the movie just completely changes. I won't go too deep into it just in case if anybody does want to watch it. But yeah, like even just from this conversation, like a lot of the movies that I would say that I would recommend for people to like help understand like Asian American perspectives are ones that aren't even about like being Asian American. They're just like really good movies and really deep and like help you understand that like it can be normal to just be Asian and in America or Asian and in a different part of the world, and like you can tell these amazing stories without necessarily it having to be in the same language, or you know, without the main character having to be white and stuff like that. I think representation is just a huge part of it. And I get so excited whenever I do see an Asian American in like a movie sometimes, because I never had that growing up. I never saw movies with like Korean actors or anything like that, you know, outside of what, like Lost, and then the main characters were like two Koreans, or the only Koreans in that movie were like two Koreans who barely knew how to speak English. Speak English. So yeah, it's crazy, and it's good though. I think it's a good kind of change to be able to see all the changes that have been happening over time.
I will say, if anyone does want to see one of the weirdest, dumbest representations ever, not because it's like a bad or offensive, but just because it's stereotypical and what the fuck, there is a horror film called Pieces, which is an older movie, I think 80s, where there's a serial killer and he's essentially trying to make a Frankenstein out of a bunch of women. But there was, I believe there was, it's not gross or gory or anything. It's very 80s. But they had, I believe, a professional martial artist on the set one day. And so they were like, oh, that's a big name. Let's put him in our movie. So it's set in a school, and they have a female police officer. She walks around the corner, and he's like, the main character, this young lad's like, oh no, my kung fu professor. And this fucking Asian man just flies around the corner, does a stereotypical Asian scream, and kicks her in the face. And he's just like, what? No, that's my kung fu professor. How are you doing, John? It's like,
what?
And then he's just like, all right, see ya, and just leaves after beating a woman up, and they're all fine with it because he's the kung fu teacher. And it's just because they had this dude who they knew come and visit a set.
Absolutely amazing. They just had to work him in. They're like, come on, we need something. We need something.
He seemed really happy about it because he got to have some fun on set and be in a movie. But I'm like, who just decides we've got an Asian man? What should we get this man to do? I know, kick a woman in the face. Like, you couldn't have just had him be, I don't know, this is my science professor. Like, the reason he's walking around at night is he's a teacher, not that he's randomly attacking women because there's a predator about. Like, I don't know. But it's very funny. It's one of those that feels dumb, not nasty, which is why I brought it up. But oh my god. But yeah, Breakfast at Tiffany's has one of the most racist depictions ever of an Asian person. They gave him fake teeth and an accent and a towel, and oh my Jesus.
Not even an Asian person. Yeah.
Yeah, so no, it's just a white man doing a Disney impersonation. So
right. So we'll be wanting to finish up here in a sec. I did have a very last minute audience question.
Let's go.
What do you think is the best way for artists to support anti-hate in the Asian community?
Ooh, perfect. Well, did you say artists?
Artists, yeah.
Artists. Ooh, that's a really good question. Actually, artists. Well, if we're I'm not 100% sure what they mean by artists. I'm assuming they just mean like traditional like drawing and coloring and stuff like that. I don't know if they mean specific, if they meant further on beyond that, but I think when it comes to using your art in order to help those, I think part of it would be like using your platform to elevate Asian American artists as well, of whatever field that you also work in. That way you can make sure that if they run a business, that they can also get their name and get their product out there. But I think that also is a good way to just help creative types who are Asian across the internet as well. I'm trying to think of other ways. You can always donate towards a lot of charities, arts programs even, I'm sure would be great for that. And if you're going to make art yourself, use it to raise awareness. Try your best not to make it about yourself. I think that can kind of be like further generalized towards most content creators and not just artists, but like make sure that if you are trying to raise money or if you're trying to do anything for people who are being marginalized, specifically in this case Asian Americans or Asian hate, make sure that you don't make it about yourself. And that's very, very important. Don't just try and throw a charity together like that purely because you want it to bring more people in. Do it because you want to raise money for the charity, or use it so that you can raise awareness about the charity. Yeah, I think those are the big ways. If you are an artist who wants to help out.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast and talking to us. It's been absolutely amazing. I wish we had more time to. Honestly, I really enjoyed this.
I would love to talk to you guys again. Like, this was a lot of fun. I would love to talk to you guys again at some point in the future when I don't run into tech issues as well, hopefully.
It would be nice to have you actually on cam as well.
Yeah, I know. You have no idea how much I was trying to like kick my laptop together in order to try and get this all worked out.
I mean, I appreciate the effort.
Yeah. If you stick around for just 1 minute at the end, Dan, when we're off, I have a question for you anyway. So
yeah, of course, sounds perfect.
Can I get some more shout outs in chat, please, for Dan and Paige, my co-host? Our next one is
sometime 22nd of April.
22nd of April.
With Commander Plato talking about terminal illness.
Yes. Thank you. Glad someone was looking in the right place. So, yes, we are going to have a week break. Finally.
We've been going for a long time. Yes.
We've been hammering these out recently. But yes, guys, there is a link there to our charity raising there to try and raise a bit of money to support Stop AAPI Hate. If you have any spare coins to throw that way, then I would very much appreciate it, because it's an extremely important cause, and we hope that this podcast has highlighted exactly why it's important. Any final words, guys?
No, thank you so much again for letting me be part of this conversation, and for giving your platforms and using your voices to do this.
Thank you for coming and sharing with us something that obviously is deeply personal. As we always say, like, anyone that comes on the show, your time is the most precious gift you can give, because you don't get it back. And to then let us into your lives, into your family, into your experience, to educate is incredibly, incredibly valuable. So thank you very much for giving that to us. It is appreciated.
As we've said earlier, we don't need to try and educate people as marginalized people, but for you to give your time to do that is extremely appreciated and valued. So yes, thank you for doing this with us.
Of course, I had so much fun.
Especially on a topic that, because I was a little worried to ask you, not for you, but just because I didn't want to paint a target on your head and be like, oh, there's a person you can go and harass. Like, no. Yeah. So I knew that if we were going to ask somebody to do this, we'd need to ask somebody who would understand the risk of it as well. So again, thank you for taking that on your shoulders, because it's not easy to paint a, hey, come and be a dick to me on your forehead. Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you. And yeah, I'm really appreciative, and it was a good conversation. I'm glad that we had this conversation.
And chat, thank you for joining us today. Next stream will be on Sunday. And if you'd like to keep in contact outside of stream, do follow on the Twitters and the Instagrams. I'm sure both of the lovely people here are on those too.
Yes.
Yes, I hope you have a good rest of your evening or day. I hope you have a good week ahead, and I will see you guys soon. Say bye, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Bye.